7 miles northeast of Youngstown, Ohio, in a rural part of Hubbard Township, lies the tiny community of Kohlberg. Never big enough to be a city or even a village, Kohlberg is a patchwork of country homes and small family businesses with less than 1,000 residents. Its post office closed over 100 years ago, and no trace remains of its once busy rail yard. But in the 19th century, Kohlberg was famous for the valuable mineral for which it was named, coal. In the 1860s, mine owners hired Welsh, Scottish, and German immigrants to excavate the precious commodity. But Kohlberg gained national attention in 1873 when 100 Italians were brought to its mines. The newcomers were the first Italian settlers in the Youngstown area. Yet, this was just the last stage of their journey to America, an epic saga that grabbed headlines on both sides of the Atlantic. Why did they leave Italy, and what attracted so many of them to such a remote part of this country?
The United States experienced dramatic industrial growth in the 19th century. Iron produced in Youngstown and the surrounding Mahoning Valley played a large part in this expansion. By the end of the Civil War, Richard Brown and William Bonnell were the most productive ironmongers in the city. Their shop was the largest iron foundry west of Pittsburgh. In 1861, the discovery of high-quality deposits of coal in neighboring Hubbard Township promised much-needed fuel for Youngstown's blast furnaces. The finds triggered an influx of speculators, including Chauncey Andrews, who was known as the Great Coal King of Youngstown. He leased several mineral-rich properties in the township and was soon selling his black diamonds in Chicago. Andrews marketed his product under the brand Burnett Bank Coal, which was named for his famous Kohlberg mine. Another industrialist drawn to the area's bounty was David Todd, the governor of Ohio during the Civil War. A prominent capitalist, Todd signed deeds on Hubbard properties shortly after the lots were shown to contain significant quantities of coal. As leader of the Cleveland and Mahoning Railroad Company, he spearheaded the construction of a rail line to transport coal from the township to the furnaces in Youngstown. At a stockholders' meeting in 1863, the company's superintendent noted a large decrease in coal receipts due to depletion of resources at old coal fields. However, he promised that the new rail line to Hubbard would, without any doubt, supply all the fuel required by the Mahoning Valley's iron mills. Strong demand for coal resulted in steady work and high wages for miners. However, the boom times ended in the fall of 1872, when iron orders fell sharply. Blast furnaces shut down and mining was curtailed. The downturn prompted Mahoning Valley operators to announce a 17% cut in miners' wages, effective on the first day of January in 1873. Refusing to accept the reduction, the diggers struck, and within a few weeks over 7,000 men deserted Ohio's coal pits. A shrewd businessman, Chauncey Andrews was one step ahead of his employees. Anticipating a walkout, he secretly enlisted a contingent of black workers from Virginia. 5 days after the onset of the strike, Andrews put the new recruits to work, outflanking his disgruntled men. Within weeks, a second crew from Virginia was hired and more idle shafts were reopened. The strategy was successful for a while. But when the black miners were denied a pay raise, they too went on strike. The failure of the plan compelled Andrews and other employers to look farther afield for replacement workers.
1872 was a bad year in Italy. Crushing taxation and growing unemployment forced many impoverished Italians to leave their homeland. Thousands fled to Argentina and Brazil, where work was plentiful. Burdened by labor shortages, these South American nations welcomed Italian laborers. Tragically, grifters seized the opportunity to exploit their wretched and unwary countrymen. In the fall of the year, an elaborate deception left nearly 3,000 hapless Italians in New York City. Although the immigrants had paid for tickets to South America, the fraudulent agents booked them on shorter, cheaper voyages to the United States. Their ignorance of geography made the Italian peasants easy targets for con artists. Newspaper editors in America and Italy reported the plight of the victims. The scandal drew immediate reactions from the United States Secretary of State Hamilton Fish and his Italian counterpart, Prime Minister Giovanni Lanza. Meanwhile, the authorities in New York were obliged to house the penniless foreigners until work could be found for them. Fortunately, the city's Immigration Bureau had a labor exchange that enabled prospective employers to find immigrants seeking work. Before long, word reached the mine bosses in the Mahoning Valley that a large number of newly arrived Italians in New York desperately needed jobs.
The Mahoning Coal Railroad Company, which was owned by Richard Brown and William Bonnell, operated a dozen mines in Hubbard Township, all of them idled by the strike of 1873. On the 18th day of March, an agent of the company went to New York City and recruited 100 of the swindled Italians to work at the firm's mining camps. To ensure a successful deal, he purposely neglected to mention the labor dispute in Ohio. The next day, the immigrants arrived at the Kohlberg Railroad Station, where a crowd of angry strikers had gathered to meet them. Despite the threatening mob, the immigrants did not retreat. They were determined to honor their agreement, even though the company's representative had not been wholly honest with them. Besides, they had no money to return to New York. The migrants were quartered in small shanties on a 22-acre lot, known as the Mahoning Coal Company's addition to Kohlberg. The miners called it the blocks, after the type of coal they found there. When the Italians entered the shafts, furious protesters retaliated by torching their barracks. But the newcomers persevered. Day after day, they marched past the pickets and descended into the tunnels to dig. Encouraged by the resumption of business in Kohlberg, owners of the nearby Church Hill pits hired their own team of Italian laborers. Within days, the strike collapsed. Andrew Roy, Ohio's chief inspector of mines, said that the Italians broke the back of the strike.
In 1875, another walkout closed the Mahoning Valley mines. When an operator asked local Italians to replace the strikers, they refused, saying they had been strike breakers once. Not understanding it, I would not do so again. When the Kohlberg mines finally played out in the 1880s, the Italians who remained on the site abandoned the shafts and turned to farming. Exchanging pickaxes for plows, they purchased their billets and established permanent homes. But they were isolated, surrounded by old miners they had replaced during the strike. Gradually, however, the hostility of the longtime residents gave way to a grudging acceptance, and the Italians became respected members of the community. They and their descendants resided on the blocks for more than 100 years, becoming so numerous the place was renamed Little Italy.